I want to thank Toge Productions for sending me a copy of this game to review. Nearly a year ago, I reviewed Valhalla, an indie visual novel game where you play as a bartender in a cyberpunk world, listening to the stories of your patrons over a period of a few weeks, and hearing about how all these multiple stories develop and link. I loved it. Everything from the atmosphere, dialogue, and the god tier music. The game really just wanted you to sit back with a drink, plop your headphones in, and play. I bring this up because Coffee Talk is a game clearly inspired by this one. Just instead of a bartender, you are a barista, and instead of a cyberpunk world, it is one of urban fantasy, where werewolves, vampires, mermaids, and cat people, Nekomi I believe they're called, all live in harmony alongside humans. Because of this clear inspiration, I can't help but compare the two, and in a way, it may have impacted my view of Coffee Talk, which isn't very fair. I won't beat around the bush, I ultimately preferred Valhalla, but that in no way says that Coffee Talk is a bad game. Far from it. Coffee Talk was a lot of fun, but it had flaws here and there that brought it down in my eyes, mainly from the gameplay. So let's just get the presentation and story out of the way first, starting with the presentation, as I have less to comment on here. The music is also really nice to listen to, but it's a very different jam from Valhalla, going for the very popular lo-fi chill hop beats to relax and drink your coffee to. Visually, it does a good job with detailed pixel art and good character design. Recontextualizing fantasy races into the modern day is an incredibly common trope to see nowadays, but I think Coffee Talk has done it in a way that makes sense. The stereotypical sexy vampire would of course get by as a model in this world, while the real life catgirl is a singer and idol. But it also doesn't always play to that stereotype because people aren't stereotypes. So you can have an orc game developer, a mermaid scientist, and a succubus office worker, and all of it is believable. They are just people after all, and that's nice to see. The coffee shop is also well detailed, with more going on here than there was in Valhalla. You can see more people sitting on the bar and can actually look around, but it does this while keeping all your essential UI components on screen. But I hope you like this setting, because it never changes. The player is always sitting in this coffee shop with the exact same view, and it can get a little tiring after a while. With Valhalla, you went back to Jill's apartment between shifts, and you could take this time to relax, customize the flat, go out, buy something. Then there was the occasional scene outside the bar. You don't get that here, which is a shame. It makes the baristas seem like they live here, which they might. Story-wise, I don't have any complaints. It has a number of subplots that are pretty interesting and just enough to be engaging, with enough simplicity that it makes sense why giving the right cup of coffee in that moment could change someone's fate. And all the characters are pretty enjoyable as well, each adding their own charm and none being distinctly dislikable. But Valhalla had Jill, a bartender that the player was controlling and following, but was her own character with her own story and quirks. She was relatable while also being a character. Coffee Shop doesn't have this. The barista is a self-insert for the player. They have no specified gender or model. They use your name. For all purposes, they are you, except they also try to be a character. Arguably, the barista is more connected to this story here than Jill was to hers in Valhalla, but it isn't nearly as impactful because they just aren't a character in this one, despite the game on multiple occasions attempting to depict them like one. The barista is the owner of a nighttime coffee shop, which is brought up as being strange, and just because you bring attention to that doesn't really justify why it's a thing. I don't see why this couldn't have been during the day, but whatever. And while being the owner could add some gameplay quirks, it just doesn't, and that's a problem. Coffee Talk is insanely easy because there isn't really a fail state. If you serve the wrong coffee 3 times, the game will force your hand and you won't develop your friendship with the characters. But outside of that, there isn't really anything else pressing on the player. No money to make, no risk of a game over from the coffee shop closing, nothing other than getting a bad ending, which to some might be incentive enough, but the game isn't hard. You can very easily save scum your way through it, and you can't actually mess up making a drink. The only part about this game that is difficult is actually needing to figure out what drink your patrons want, because for whatever reason, you run a coffee shop with a blank menu. The game gives hints to the types of drinks that can be made in its loading screens, but how would you know to mark that down? When a customer asks for a real-world Indonesian drink that technically requires a specialised mixing method, how am I supposed to figure that out other than looking up the drink online and then guessing which order the game wants me to put the ingredients in? Because making a drink that's coffee, milk and cinnamon is different from making a drink that is coffee, cinnamon and milk, which is a tad annoying. I do think the simple number of items does help to keep the game manageable. I just think it could have been handled a little better. I don't want it to feel like I am being too negative on this game though, as it is really good, and if you are a fan of visual novels, I would recommend it. There are multiple endings, you won't fill out your coffee decks in one playthrough, and there is an endless mode for replayability. Coffee Talk offers a lot to like, it's just bogged down by the little things. However, if you are like me and missing the joy of going out for a nice cup of coffee in these isolated times, then Coffee Talk is a game for you. Make a cuppa, snuggle in bed, and just talk about some coffee. Once again, I want to thank Toge Productions for sending me a copy of this game to review. I hope it has done them well, and if they ever make a sequel, I hope that they take my feedback to heart, as I'm sure they can make something great. Thank you everyone for watching, and especially to our patrons, the $5 plus tier appearing on screen right now. They help us keep the site up, and in exchange join us for streams, get some behind the scenes action, and can request topics for us to cover. If you don't have the funds though, I totally understand, so maybe you'd be kind enough to spare a like or a share? Maybe even a subscribe and bell notification if you haven't already. That way you can always remember to return to the source.